The build versus buy decision is always one of the biggest decisions that you make in as a CTO or in the technology space. And I think it's actually, like, in some respects, it should be the simplest decision these days, where you kind of buy the commodity, you buy the thing that's not where you're adding value, and you build where you truly add value or where you're going to differentiate. I think the trouble with it often is finding the right partners and people to work with that allow you to do that. And I think there's always a lot of fear around kind of vendor lock-in or being too locked into a corner to not be able to combine things and to do that. I think one of the biggest benefits of buying is you can get an awful lot right out the gates and get to market much more quickly with something. And I think that's really incredibly useful. Working with a partner that allows you to do that, but then later in the day add the customizations, take more into your control, or sometimes even go in the opposite direction is really, really key. So sometimes you actually want to relinquish control of something. You might look at something. I've certainly been in situations in the past where we thought, actually, this isn't really where we want to be spending all of our time. Can we hand this back to somebody else? So always the decision for me is about, we really want to be building where we're adding the most value. We want to be able to make a decision now and change that, not necessarily change the whole decision later, but change parts of that decision later. And we want somebody on a journey with us. I think the final thing, really, when you're working with a company in the buy circumstance, you really want somebody who's going to bring, or what's always super beneficial and what I've always liked is when you can work with somebody who kind of meets you on a level and can bring expertise to the party as well, about both their specific discipline. So for us, it would be payments, but also how that applies in your specific situation. So, always about building where you add most value, buying where you don't, but also having the flexibility to change and move that over time, and work with a partner closely on it.
It's a very interesting debate, and I think the build versus buy question that I get presented with from a customer, a lender, is always very binary. Should we build versus should we buy? And so I think from my perspective, I'm often almost educating clients that there is another way to look at it. And I always present them with an analogy that's around Formula One. So, one of the most competitive sports that there's 10 teams, 20 drivers, but they all use the same engines. There's 4 engines. So they get their competitive advantage, their small margins from other things that they do, whether that's the design of the chassis or changing the aerodynamics. And I think you can almost delineate the same thing from a lending platform perspective. Is I think there are certain elements of that platform that you should absolutely not try and build yourself. It's the compliance, calculation, how you calculate a loan, how you run and manage that loan. There is elements of that you really shouldn't want to go and build yourself, whereas your secret sauce, your IP, is where perhaps you want that flexibility, that framework to build out and create something that's unique to yourself and create that competitive advantage. And then again, I would always layer in that the sort of ecosystem of partners that then are available to plug into to allow that. So the challenge that I often have, come back to the start with lenders, is getting them to think less binary about build versus buy, and actually whether there's the best of both worlds out there.
I think that's a really interesting point. Is there is not just a binary point, is that there's a kind of a hybrid approach that can be adopted, and sometimes, to your point, Matt, you might want to start off doing one thing. You might want to start off by buying something in, and then at some point decide, well, actually no, we want to relinquish here, or vice versa. And we've often seen people starting off thinking they can build it themselves, and then they get into the complexities of actually, like you said, Kieron, the compliance element, the regulatory element, the demanding customer expectations, and all of a sudden you realise that there's a massive amount of time and effort and investment that needs to be put into this in order to make it successful. And then that's detracting from the key thing that you're trying to do, wherever your USP is or wherever you're trying to differentiate yourself. If you're actually focusing on building a loan management platform, when actually you could have just bought one in, it does detract from what you're trying to do as a key part of the business. I think an often overlooked element of it, of this whole conversation is, okay, well, once you've built, then what? You've still got to maintain. Actually, you've got to support. You've got to make sure that there's continued investment. Technology goes out of date very, very quickly these days. Frameworks and languages are very often deprecated and become end of support. New hosting approaches come along board. We, as software providers, invest a huge amount of time and effort actually keeping up to date with these things, learning about them, evolving, looking at what the best approach is, and that is a very, very expensive thing for people to do. And before you know it, you might think, well, actually, yeah, I'll just build and then I'm done. But no, that's only the start of it. There's a whole load of other time and effort that needs to go into it after that.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that, because that's an absolutely critical point that often gets overlooked massively, is the total cost of ownership. And it's really easy to think of the build window as the only cost element of it. Actually, the ongoing cost can, and I think it goes into multiples as well. So not only do you have maintaining that software, that thing that you've built over the long term, which has its own cost, but you introduce more complexity and more options for other things to go wrong and interdependencies and things like that. And it is, I think, total cost of ownership is one of the most criminally overlooked things when making this build versus buy decision.
I mean, resiliency is a key challenge as well, isn't it? We've not really talked about it, but particularly within financial services at the moment, organisations have to have resilient systems. There's loads of examples just even this year, aren't there, of institutions that have not had resilient systems, and all of a sudden there's a mass exodus of customers, or they lose customer loyalty because of it. And again, overlooked. It's an expensive thing to maintain that, and will be a large part of that total cost of ownership if not done properly.